The sky split open, white and jagged, and in that flash, Elias Rourke saw the town, Dead Mare Gulch. It was aptly named. It looked like a handful of rotted teeth kicked into the alkali dust. The thunder that followed felt like a judgment, vibrating through the soles of his worn-out boots as he trudged through the sucking mud. He was on foot. His last horse had given out 2 days back, and he hadn't the heart or the coin to steal another. Rain, cold as a final shovel of dirt, plastered his thin shirt to his skin. He was already bruised, ribs aching from a fall 3 days prior, but that pain was a shallow distraction. It was nothing compared to the deeper ache, the one that lived under his skin, centered on the knot of old, raised flesh that snaked across his back. He never spoke of it. He never spoke of Silas either. The memory hit him, sharp as the wind. Arizona, the dust, the shouting, the smell of gunpowder, and Silas looking at him with surprise, his hand outstretched. Before he fell, Elias flinched, the memory and the cold rain hitting him at once. He was empty, empty of hope, empty of coin, and empty of everything but a grief so heavy it felt like he was carrying his brother's body on his shoulders. He had nowhere to sleep. The only light blinking against the downpour was the saloon. The Dry Gullet, a miserable name for a miserable place. Elias pushed through the swinging doors, bringing the storm in with him. The smell of stale beer, wet wool, and cheap tobacco hit him like a fist. The air was thick with smoke and desperation. A piano player in the corner was missing half the keys, or perhaps just playing them wrong. Elias didn't care. He just needed a drink to dull the edge and maybe a spot on the floor by the stove. He had $3 left in the world. He put one on the rough-hewn bar. The whiskey was foul, burning a path straight to his gut, but it was hot. He leaned against the bar, letting the noise wash over him, trying not to see Silas's face in the swirling smoke. Then the noise changed. It wasn't the usual drunken shouting. It was the wet, rhythmic sound of leather hitting flesh, followed by a grunt. In the corner, a big barrel-chested man in a buffalo coat was hammering a smaller man. The smaller man, caked in mud and ore dust, was curled on the floor, trying to protect his head. "That's enough, Thorne," the bartender said, polishing a glass, not even looking. Thorne, the big man, just laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. He drew back his heavy boot and kicked the miner in the ribs. The small man wheezed, a bubble of blood appearing at his lips. "He ain't had enough till I say he has. Owed me for 3 weeks. The rat." Elias closed his eyes. It was not his fight. He was tired. He was broken. He had failed the one person he was ever meant to protect. He was done protecting. He took another sip of the awful whiskey. "Please," the miner whispered, spitting blood onto the floorboards. Thorne grinned, showing a row of brown, broken teeth. He drew back his boot again, this time aiming for the man's face. "No." Elias's voice was quiet, rough as gravel, but it cut through the din. The piano player stopped. Thorne froze, his boot in the air. "I said," Elias repeated, turning his head slowly, his eyes cold and empty. "No." Thorne lowered his foot. He looked Elias up and down, taking in the wet clothes, the exhaustion. He grinned. "What's that, stranger? You want some, too? I want you to leave him be." Elias didn't move from the bar. He just watched. "Or what?" Thorne took a step toward him, puffing out his chest. He was a good 6 inches taller and twice as wide. Elias sighed. It felt like the heaviest thing he'd done all day. He finished his whiskey, setting the glass down gently on the bar. "Or I'll have to stop you." The fight was fast and ugly. Thorne swung a fist as big as a ham. Elias, despite the ache in his ribs and the weariness in his bones, moved quicker than a man that weary had a right to. He ducked under the punch and drove his own fist into Thorne's soft gut. The man wheezed, surprised. Elias hit him twice more, a crack to the jaw and another sharp blow to the ribs. Before Thorne even knew what had happened, the big man staggered back, spitting a tooth, and crashed into a table. Elias didn't feel triumph. He just felt tired. He turned to go, to find some dark corner to pass out in. He never saw the knife. It wasn't Thorn. It was a weaselly little man, a friend, who slipped out of the crowd and plunged a blade into Elias's left side, just under the ribs. The pain was white-hot, stealing his breath. Elias gasped, grabbing at the wound. The weaselly man was gone, melted back into the shadows. Thorn was laughing, getting to his feet. Elias stumbled backward, through the swinging doors, and collapsed. The world went gray. He landed face down in the thick, churning mud of the street, the cold rain mixing with the hot blood seeping from his side. The doors of the dry gullet swung shut. The piano music started up again. No one came out. He did not know how long he lay there, minutes or hours. The world was mud and rain and the throb in his side. He was freezing. This is how it ends, he thought. Not in a blaze of glory, not even in a gunfight, just bleeding out in the slop of a town with no name he cared to remember. He thought of Silas. "I'm coming, brother," he whispered, or thought he did. Then, a shadow, a presence. Not a man. He felt hands on him, small but surprisingly strong, rolling him over. The rain hit his face. He forced his eyes open. He saw a face, pale in the lightning, framed by wet, dark hair. A woman. She looked afraid, not of him, but of the open street. She was looking up and down the muddy track, her eyes wide. "You cannot," he tried to say. "Leave me." "Be silent," she commanded. Her voice was low, strained. "Or they will hear." She grabbed him under the arms. He tried to help, tried to use his legs, but they were jelly. The pain in his side was a living thing, a fire that consumed him. He blacked out again. The world reduced to the sound of dragging, the scrape of his boots over wet earth, and her ragged breathing. When he next found a moment of clarity, he was indoors. The sound of the storm was muffled, distant. The first thing that registered was the warmth. A fire snapped in a small stone hearth. The second was the smell. It was not the stale rot of the saloon. This was clean. It smelled of pine needles, of drying lavender, and something sharp and earthy, like dug-up roots. He was on a pallet, a soft cot, not a bed. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. The room was small. Just one room, but packed. Bunches of herbs hung from the rafters, their shadows dancing in the firelight. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with canned goods, but with glass jars of powders and seeds, strange, smooth stones, and books. So many books, their leather spines cracked with age. A bleached coyote skull sat on the windowsill, watching the storm. She was at the fire, her back to him, stoking it. She was small, slender, moving with a quiet efficiency. He saw her face when she turned. Mariel. He didn't know her name, but that is what he would come to know her as. Her face was fine-boned, but it was not soft. It was the face of someone who had seen too much winter. Her eyes dark and watchful. She brought a basin of steaming water. "This will hurt," she said. "No apology, just a statement of fact." She cut his shirt away. He gritted his teeth as the wet fabric, stuck with congealed blood, pulled at the wound. She clicked her tongue. "A pig stuck you." He watched her through a haze of pain. Her hands were steady. She cleaned the gash with something that stung worse than the whiskey, and he hissed. "Hold still," she said, "or I will sew your skin to your pants." He almost smiled. He looked at her hands. They were clean, the nails short, the fingers long. She threaded a needle, the metal glinting. "You are a doctor," he slurred. She looked at him, her eyes dark and unreadable. "I am what I need to be." Her touch was gentle, but sure. She stitched the gash with quick, precise movements. She was all business, her face set in concentration. He watched the line of her jaw, the way a stray piece of hair stuck to her damp forehead. She was the first person in months who had touched him with anything other than violence. When she finished, she packed the wound with a thick, dark-smelling paste. "This will stop the fever," she said. "If you are lucky." Lucky was not a word Elias associated with himself. The fever came on fast. The next few days were a blur, a murky, suffocating river of pain and memory. He was back in Arizona, the air thick with alkali dust. The cattle were lowing, nervous. Silas was laughing, his teeth white in his young face. "We'll be rich, Eli, rich!" Then the shots, the yelling, the confusion. Silas, on the ground, looking up at him. "Why, Eli, why'd you let them?" "Silas!" he shouted, thrashing on the pallet. He was burning. The scar on his back felt like a fresh brand, a hand, cool and damp, pressed against his forehead. "Hush," a voice whispered. "Hush now. You are safe." He blinked. The dust of Arizona faded. It was Marielle. Her face swam in his vision. She was holding a tin cup to his lips. "Drink." The water was bitter, laced with whatever herbs she used, but it was cool. He drank greedily. He felt her hand on his, gentle, just resting there. "Silas," he mumbled. "He is not here," she said softly. "Sleep." He slept, but the dreams always returned. The fire, the raid. The feel of the whip that had laid his back open. The scar he earned trying to pull his brother from a bar fight that went wrong months before the raid. He had failed to protect him then, and he had failed to protect him at the end. Each time he woke, she was there. Sometimes she was reading by the fire, her face lost in shadow. Sometimes she was grinding herbs with a stone pestle. The rhythmic sound a strange comfort. She rarely spoke, but her presence was a constant, a cool anchor in his sea of fire. One afternoon, the fever broke. He woke, and the room was sharp and clear. He was soaked in sweat, but his mind was his own. He was weak, weaker than a kitten, but he was alive. He heard voices outside, low, angry. "She has him in there," a man's voice said. "The one who near killed Thorne. A gunman, I wager. A dangerous man." "And what about my boy?" Another voice, sharper. "Jebediah's been sick ever since he crossed her fence line, puking his guts." "She put a hex on him. I tell you, a hex." "Calm yourself, Sheriff," the first voice said. "We don't know that. I know she's unnatural, living out here on the edge, same as her grandmother, talking to herself. My boy broke her garden fence, that's all. A boy's mischief, and she cursed him for it." Elias pushed himself up on one elbow. His side screamed in protest. Marielle was standing by the door, her back to him, peeking through a crack in the wood. Her whole body was rigid. The voices faded, the men moving off, their boots crunching in the dirt. Marielle let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a long time. She turned, and her eyes met his. She looked startled, as if she'd forgotten he was there. "So," he said, his voice a dry croak, "you're a witch." Her face hardened. She went to the hearth, picked up a kettle. "You are awake." "Seems so." He struggled to sit up. Who were they? The sheriff and the preacher. She brought him a cup of broth. It smelled like rabbit. "Eat." He took it. His hands trembled. "They sound convinced about that boy." "The sheriff's boy," she said, staring into the fire, "is a bully. He came here 2 nights ago, drunk, and kicked in my garden gate. He tried to pull up my herbs. He called me names." "What happened?" "I keep nightshade by the fence," she said simply, "to protect the medicine. He must have handled it. And then, being a fool, put his hands in his mouth. He will be sick for 3 days. He will not die, but he will wish he had." Elias looked at her. "You let them believe it's a curse. What would you have me tell them? Stranger? The truth. They do not care for truth here. They only care for what they already believe." He drank the broth. It was hot and life-giving. "They called me a gunman. You fought Thorne. You won. In their eyes, that makes you dangerous." "And you," he said. "You took in a dangerous man." She finally looked at him, truly looked at him. Her eyes were the color of the pine woods at dusk, deep and gray and full of shadows. "I took in a dying one. I have not decided which you are yet." The days passed. His strength returned, slowly. He moved from the pallet to a chair by the fire. They existed in the small cabin in a strange silence, punctuated by small, necessary conversations. "I need wood for the fire," she would say. "I can chop it," he would answer. "You cannot. Your side will split." He would watch her go out, axe in hand, and split the rounds herself, her movements economical and strong. He was wary of her. He had been raised on stories of the Bible, of good and evil. And this woman, she lived in a gray space he did not understand. She had books he could not read, filled with strange drawings of plants and stars. She had animal bones on her shelves. She talked to herself, or maybe to the ravens that sometimes landed on her roof. But he was drawn to her. He was drawn to the quiet intensity, the way she moved, the absolute, unbending core of her. She had saved him. She had stitched his skin and fed him broth and sat with him through his darkest fever dreams. He owed her his life. She was distant, mysterious. She offered nothing of herself. She asked him no questions, not his name, not where he was from, not what had happened in Arizona. He was simply stranger, or you. But her loneliness was a palpable thing. It was in the way she held her cup with both hands, as if to warm herself from the inside. It was in the way she would stop, mid-task, and stare out the window, her face achingly empty. It radiated from her like heat from a stone that had been in the sun all day, long after the sun had gone down. One evening, the storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean and cold. He was sitting on the small stool she'd used for her herbs, testing the pull on his stitches. They itched. "You should go," she said, not looking at him. She was packing dried leaves into a small muslin bag. "I can't," he said. "I've got no horse, no coin." "That is not my concern." Her voice was flat. "I'll work. I'll pay you back for saving me." She tied the bag shut with a quick, violent pull. She finally turned to him. "You do not understand. This town, Dead Mare Gulch, it is a sickness, and I am the thing it blames. The sheriff's boy is fine. He was back in the saloon last night, boasting. It is always something. Last year, it was the drought. Before that, the stillborn calf at Miller's farm. They need a reason for their misery. I am that reason." "Why?" he asked. "Because you're different?" "Because I am here," she said. "Because I am alone. Because my grandmother taught me to heal, and their preacher taught them to fear." She walked to the window. The sun was setting, bleeding red and orange over the western ridge. The pine woods that bordered her small property were growing dark, turning into a solid black wall. "You need to leave," she said again, her voice softer now, almost a plea. "They will not tolerate you being here. They already think you are my guard, my lover." She spat the word like it was poison. "They will see you as tainted, or they will see you as a threat." "Let them," Elias said, surprised at the steel in his own voice. She shook her head, her eyes not leaving the window. "You are a fool. You are like all the others. You think a gun solves this. This is not a thing a gun can solve." He watched her. He had seen men in fear. He had seen men face a stampede or a drawn pistol. Her fear was different. It was old. It was constant. He noticed it then. Her eyes, they were not looking at the town. They were fixed on the tree line. She was scanning the edge of the woods, back and forth, as if expecting something to emerge. Not a man, not a wolf, something else. "What is it?" he asked, standing up, wincing as his wound pulled. "What are you looking for?" Marielle's hand went to the small amulet at her throat, a piece of dark stone he hadn't noticed before. She closed her eyes. "You should not have come here. Elias Rourke," she whispered. It was the first time she had used his name. He must have said it in his fever. "Go," she said, opening her eyes, the fear replaced by a cold, hard shell. "As soon as you can walk, you will go, or you will be buried here, and I will not be the one to dig your grave." She turned from the window, and the last light of the day caught the silver in her dark hair. And for a moment, he thought he understood why the town was so afraid. She was beautiful, and she was terrified. And that was the most dangerous combination in a place like this. His side healed, but it healed slow. The stitches itched, a constant reminder of his debt and his predicament. Elias Rourke was not a man built for sitting still, and he was not a man who lived on charity, especially not the charity of a woman who was clearly risking her own neck to give it. After a week, he could stand straight without his vision blurring. By 10 days, he was walking the perimeter of her small property, testing his strength. Marielle watched him, but said nothing. She had given him her warning. Now, she seemed to be waiting for him to take it. He did not. He had nowhere to go. Dead Mare Gulch was a trap, but it was the only trap he was in. He had no horse, no gun, and the $3 he'd had were long gone, probably soaked into the mud outside the dry gullet. "I'm going to find work," he announced one morning. The air was sharp. With the first real bite of autumn, Marielle was grinding corn. She didn't look up. "There is no work for you here. I can muck a stall. I can lift a crate. I can swing an axe. I'll find something." "You are the man who fought Thorn," she said, her voice flat. "And you are the man who lives in my house. You are marked twice over." "I'm staying in the barn," he corrected her, though he'd only moved out there 3 days ago. The small, drafty space was better than the pallet in her cabin, if only because it gave him air to breathe that wasn't thick with herbs and her unsettling quiet. "The town does not care for such details." She finally looked at him, her dark eyes holding no pity. "Go, if you must, but do not be surprised when they turn you away." She was right. The town was a wall of cold shoulders and hard stares. He went first to the livery, run by a man named Hezekiah Dunn. The stable was large, the smell of hay and manure a comfort to him. "Looking for work," Elias said, pitching his voice loud enough to be heard over the ring of a blacksmith's hammer nearby. Dunn, a rail-thin man with a sour face, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. He looked Elias up and down, his eyes lingering on the torn, blood-stained shirt that Marielle had washed but could not mend. "You're Rourke." It was a statement, not a question. "I heard you handle yourself in a brawl." "I'm looking for work, not trouble," Elias said, keeping his hands loose at his sides. "You're living out at the witch's place." Elias felt a cold spike in his gut. "I'm staying in her barn till I can pay my way. She stitched me up. She stitched you," Dunn repeated, as if tasting the words. "Aye, she's good at that. Good at—" He let the sentence hang, his eyes slimy. "Got no work for your kind." "My kind?" "The kind that beds down with hexes and Apaches." He turned his back. "Get out of my stable. You're bringing a stink in with you." Elias stood there for a long moment, the blood rising in his neck. He wanted to grab the man, to feel his thin bones crack, but he remembered the knife in his side, the mud, the cold. He remembered Silas, and the endless string of fights he'd started and Elias had to finish. He turned and walked away, the blacksmith's hammer ringing like a judgment behind him. It was the same at the mercantile, the same at the freight office. Men saw him coming and their faces shuddered. Doors were closed. Not hiring became a chorus. He was a ghost in broad daylight, a man they all saw but refused to acknowledge. As he walked the length of the muddy main street, he saw them. Children, 4 or 5 boys, none older than 10, huddled by the alley near the assay office. They were gathering stones. Elias slowed, watching them. They whispered, darting glances at him, then back down the street. He followed their gaze. They were looking toward the path that led to Marielle's cabin. One of the boys, braver than the others, hefted a rock. "Let's see if we can hit the chimney." Elias moved before he thought. He crossed the street in 5 long strides, his shadow falling over them. The boys froze, their faces pale and grubby. "Drop them," Elias said. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of the thunder he'd ridden in on. The boys stared, wide-eyed. "I said, drop the stones." The rocks clattered to the dirt. "Now go home," he said. "Go on. Get—" They scattered like quail, disappearing into the alleyways. Elias stood there, breathing hard. He looked at the rocks in the dirt, small, ugly. meant to wound. He felt a rage so pure and cold it almost made him sick. He turned and walked back toward the cabin. As he got closer, he could hear them. Shouts. Not from the boys he'd scared off. These were coming from the woods. He cut through the pines, moving quickly. He stopped at the edge of her clearing. Mariel was standing by her gate, her arms crossed tight. The children were there, the same ones, but they'd circled around. They were bolder now, keeping their distance, just outside her fence line. "Witch!" one of them yelled. A boy with bright red hair. "My PA says you're a witch! Devil lover!" another one shrieked. A rock sailed through the air. It was a weak throw, landing 10 feet shy of her, but it was the first. Mariel didn't flinch. She just stood there, her face carved from stone, watching them. "You cursed Jebediah!" the red-haired boy shouted. "You made him sick! Go home, Amos," Mariel said, her voice strained. "Go home before your mother wonders where you are. My mother says you're the devil's bride." The words hit Mariel harder than the stone had. Elias saw her shoulders tighten, saw her flinch. The words were not the boy's. They were an echo. Elias stepped out of the woods. "You heard her," he said. "Go home." The boys jumped, startled. Seeing him again, here, at her side, seemed to confirm something awful in their small minds. The red-haired boy, Amos, looked from Elias to Mariel, his face a mask of fear and righteousness. "See, he's with her, the devil's man." "Amos!" Elias's voice cracked like a whip. "Get!" This time, they ran. They ran hard, disappearing into the trees, their insults trailing behind them until they were just rustling leaves. Elias walked toward her. She was shaking, though she tried to hide it. Her hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "They were throwing stones. And now you are my defender. You are the devil's man. You have just proven them right. I don't care what they—" "I do," she snapped, turning on him, her eyes blazing. "I have to live here after you are gone. You, with your anger and your fists, you are just a storm passing through. But I am the one who has to live in the wreckage you leave." She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his chest, and went inside. The cabin door shut with a final, wooden thud. Elias stood by the gate, looking at the small rock in the dirt. He kicked it, hard, sending it spinning into the weeds. He was tied to her now, not by gratitude, but by their scorn. That Sunday, he heard the preacher. Her cabin was too far to hear the sermon clearly, but the wind was right, and the man had a voice built for judgment. Elias was chopping wood. He had insisted, and she had finally relented, giving him the axe with a weary sigh, when the words drifted up the hill. "A blight in our midst." The voice, high and reedy, was carried on the wind. "A vessel of sin, a bride of the devil himself, who consorts with darkness and men of violence." Elias stopped, the axe heavy in his hands. He knew who the preacher meant. He knew who the man of violence was. He struck the wood, splitting the log in two with a single, furious blow. Later that evening, he found her sitting on the porch steps, staring at the tree line. The cold was setting in, but she didn't seem to notice. He had moved his things to the barn, a small, lean-to structure that smelled of old hay and mice. It was cold, but it was his. He sat on the other end of the porch, a good 6 feet away. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind in the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. "My grandmother," she said, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it, "was Mescalero Apache." Elias stopped cleaning his nails with his knife. He waited. "She was not from here. She was taken long ago. She married a white trapper, my grandfather. He died. She stayed. The town tolerated her then. She was a midwife. She knew the herbs. She delivered half the babies in this valley, including that preacher who curses me. She picked up a small twig and began tracing patterns in the dust. She taught me which roots stop a fever, which leaves close a wound, which teas ease a birth. She called it the way of the earth, ancient ways. She said, ways before God had a name. Elias watched her profile, the strong line of her nose, the sadness in her mouth. When she died, the winter was hard. The crops failed. The fever took 3 children. It was easier, I think, to blame me. The old woman was a strange, brown-skinned healer. I was her shadow, her granddaughter, the one who spoke to her in a language they didn't understand. When she was gone, the town turned. It got colder. "They're fools," Elias said, his voice rough. "They are afraid." She corrected him. "It is not the same thing. A fool can be taught, a man who is afraid. He will burn down the world to feel safe." She looked at him. "Your side? Is it healed?" "Almost. Then you will leave." "I have no money, no horse. That is not my problem." "It is," he said, turning to face her. "I made it your problem when I defended you." She held his gaze. "So you did." She stood up, brushing the dirt from her skirt. "So you did." A few nights later, the fear came to her door. It was well past midnight. Elias was asleep in the barn, or trying to. The hay was thin, the cold thick. He was drifting in a bad dream. Dust, shouting. Silas's face when a small, frantic tapping woke him. It was not at the barn door. It was at the cabin. He was on his feet in an instant, his knife in his hand. He moved to the barn's cracked window, peering through the darkness. He saw a man and a woman, huddled by Marielle's door. The woman was holding a bundle. The cabin door opened a crack. A sliver of light. He heard Marielle's voice, low and sharp. "What is it? Please." The man's voice was a desperate whisper. We didn't know who else. It's our boy, our Thomas." Elias recognized the voice. It was Abe, the man who ran the small smithy, the one who worked for Dunn. He fell on a scythe. His leg. God, his leg. It smells. Elias watched as Marielle opened the door wider. The woman, Abe's wife, Sarah, was sobbing. Elias had seen the boy, Thomas, around town, a quiet child of 7 or 8. "Bring him in," Marielle ordered. "Quickly, put him on the table." Elias stayed in the barn. It was not his place. He watched the light in her window for hours. He saw Marielle's shadow, quick and focused. He saw the parents, huddled by the hearth, 2 ghosts of terror. Just before dawn, the door opened again. Abe carried the boy out. He was asleep, his leg thickly bandaged. Sarah, her face gray with exhaustion, followed them. Elias stepped out of the barn. Abe saw him and froze, his guilt and fear plain on his face. She did it," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "She saved him." Abe wouldn't meet Elias's eyes. He just clutched his son tighter. We should go." "She saved him," Elias said. "You should thank her." Abe looked at the cabin door, then back at the dark path to town. His face was a mask of conflict. "We can't," he whispered. "If they knew we came here, the preacher, Dunn." "She's a good woman," Sarah said, but it was a question, not a statement. She was trying to convince herself. Just don't tell anyone we was here," Abe pleaded. He turned and hurried down the path, his wife stumbling after him. Elias watched them go. He turned to the cabin. Mariel was standing in the doorway, her sleeves rolled up, her arms and apron stained with blood and the dark paste she used. Her face was pale, exhausted. "They'll be back," Elias said. "No," she said. "They will not. They'll pay you, at least." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "They will not. They will go to church on Sunday and pray for forgiveness for coming here. They will tell themselves it was God who healed the boy, and I was just his dark instrument." She leaned against the door frame, and for the first time, he saw how truly tired she was. Not just from the night, but a weariness that went bone deep. "Go chop my wood, Mr. Rourke," she said softly. "At least that is something I can count on." He did. He chopped wood until his shoulders burned and his side ached. He built her a woodpile that would last a month, stacked tight and high against the cabin wall. He stayed in the barn, but he began to spend his evenings on her porch, sitting on the steps, while she worked inside. He watched her. He learned the rhythm of her days. She rose before the sun. She tended her small garden. She swept her floor. She ground her herbs. She was all quiet ritual, but the attraction was there. A low, simmering thing he tried to ignore. It was a hunger he hadn't felt in a long time. He'd find himself watching her hands as she kneaded dough, the strength in her fingers. He'd find his eyes drawn to the line of her throat when she reached up to tie a bundle of herbs. He was a man who had been alone for a long time, and she was a woman who was more alone than anyone he had ever met. One night, the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. The stars were like chips of ice, sharp and bright. He was on the porch, wrapped in his thin blanket, watching them. He was thinking of Arizona, of the wide, warm nights, and how far away that felt. The cabin door opened. She came out, her long, dark hair unbraided, spilling over her shoulders. She was barefoot, her white nightgown almost glowing in the moonlight. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She just walked to the steps and sat, a few feet from him, drawing her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. "You'll freeze," he said, his voice rough. "I like the cold." She said, "It's clean." They sat in silence, watching the sky. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full. "I have dreams," she said, her voice so soft it was almost part of the wind. He waited. "I dream of wolves, a whole pack. They are running, and I am running with them. I am not afraid. I am one of them. We are running toward the mountain, where the snow is. It feels like going home." He thought of her grandmother, the mescalero. "A good dream," he said. "And I have another," she continued, her voice tightening. "I dream of fire, a big fire. It is in a town, like this one, and the people are shouting. They are holding torches, and I can smell the smoke." She turned her head, looking at him in the darkness. "In the dream, I am tied to a post, and I am burning." Elias felt the cold run straight through him, a cold that had nothing to do with the air. He wanted to tell her it was just a dream, but he looked at her face, pale and serious in the starlight, and the words died in his throat. He knew it wasn't. It was a memory, or a prophecy. In a place like this, they were the same thing. "It's just a dream, Marielle," he said, using her name. It felt strange on his tongue, too familiar. She looked away, back at the stars. "Yes, just a dream." The distance between them was still 6 feet, but it felt like it had shrunk to nothing. From that night, something shifted. The wall between them, the one she kept built so high, had a crack in it. He started to see the woman, not just the witch or the healer. He longed to touch her. It was a base, simple thing. He wanted to touch her hair, to see if it was as soft as it looked. He wanted to put his hand on her back, to feel the life in her. But he sensed the fear in her, a fear that was different from her fear of the town. It was a fear of him, of his size, his maleness. He would watch her through the cabin window from his porch. He felt like a creep, but he couldn't help it. One night, she was brushing her hair. She sat in her chair, the candlelight catching the red highlights in the dark strands. She brushed it slow, 100 strokes, the movement hypnotic. The light played on her skin, on the curve of her neck. Elias felt a tightening in his gut, a raw, physical ache that had nothing to do with his wound. He wanted her. He wanted to be in that warm room. He wanted to be the one taking the brush from her hand. He got up and went back to the cold barn, his breath ragged, his hands clenched. He could barely sleep. He lay in the hay. The image of her burned into his mind, and he hated himself for it. He hated the town for what it was doing to her, and he hated his own body for wanting her in the midst of it. The next day, the world broke. It started as a rumor, a frantic shout from the woods. 2 children, a brother and sister, the children of the mercantile owner, had gone missing. They had gone picking berries and had not come back. Elias knew, even before the shouting started, where the blame would fall. He was in the barn, mending a piece of harness he'd found. When he heard the first scream, it was Mariel. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, animalistic grief. He ran. He found her in the clearing. By her garden, the gate was broken again, smashed off its hinges. Her herb garden, the one she tended with such care, was destroyed. It had been trampled, the plants ripped up by the roots, the neatly laid out stones kicked aside, and in the center, on a stake, was a dead rabbit, skinned and bloody. They were warned. A voice roared. It was the preacher, storming up the path, his face purple with rage. The sheriff was with him, and a half-dozen other men from the town, their faces grim. "The children! They went into the woods, where they were warned not to go, near your land." "Where are they?" the sheriff demanded, his hand on his gun. "What have you done with them? Which?" I don't know," Mariel stammered, backing away, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on the destroyed garden. "I haven't seen them. Liar!" the preacher shrieked. "She took them, for a sacrifice. She's a fiend, a child-eater." "I did nothing," Mariel cried, her voice breaking. "I was here, all day." "She's lying." Amos, the red-haired boy, piped up from behind the men. I seen her talking to the trees, calling them." "This is madness," Elias said, stepping in front of Mari. "She's done nothing." "Get out of the way, Rourke," the sheriff said, his eyes cold. "This ain't your business. This is town business." "You are destroying her home," Elias said, his voice a low growl. "You are terrifying her, and you're blaming her for your own carelessness. You lost your children, not her." The preacher's face went from purple to white. "He is one of them. He is her consort. Seize him." Two men grabbed Elias. He shook them off, sending one sprawling, but there were too many. They overwhelmed him, pinning his arms. "No!" Mariel screamed. "Leave him alone!" "Take her," the sheriff ordered. They grabbed her. Mariel fought, but she was small. One of the men, Thorne's weaselly friend, the one who had knifed Elias, grabbed her hair and laughed. "Stop!" Elias roared, straining against the men. "This is a warning, witch," the preacher said, his voice trembling with righteous fury. "Find those children, or we will be back, and we will finish what our righteous anger has started." They shoved Mariel to the ground, into the mud of her ruined garden. They let Elias go, pushing him down to his knees beside her. The men backed away, their faces full of hate and fear. "God will not suffer a witch to live," the preacher threw over his shoulder, and then they were gone, their boots echoing on the hard path. Elias was breathing like a bellows. He got to his feet, his whole body shaking with a rage so profound he thought he might be sick. He looked at Mariel. She was on her hands and knees, in the mud. She was not crying. She was just still. She was looking at a crushed bundle of lavender, her hand hovering over it. "Mariel," he said, his voice raw. She didn't move. "Mariel, are you hurt?" She looked up at him. Her face was blank, her eyes empty. It was the emptiness that scared him more than the anger. She looked broken. She got to her feet, slowly, and walked past him. She didn't go to the cabin. She went to the barn. She walked into the darkest corner, where the old hay was piled, and she slid down the wall until she was sitting in the dirt. And then she broke. It was not a loud sobbing. It was a silent, agonizing crumbling. Her shoulders heaved. She put her face in her hands, her body rocking back and forth. The sounds that came out of her were not human. They were the sounds of an animal caught in a trap, a sound of such profound, hopeless pain that it stopped Elias's heart. He followed her in, his heart a stone in his chest. He didn't know what to do. He was a man of fists and anger. He did not know this. He knelt in front of her. "Mariel." She flinched, curling in on herself. It's just me," he said, his voice cracking. He reached out, his hand trembling, and put it on her shoulder. The touch was a lightning strike. She collapsed against him, her hands flying up to grip the front of his shirt. She buried her face in his chest, clutching him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Her sobs ripped through him. He could feel her tears, hot and wet, soaking his shirt. He could feel the desperate, frantic pounding of her heart against his ribs. He did not know what to do, so he just did the only thing he could. He put his arms around her. He pulled her close, his hand moving to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice thick. "I've got you. You're all right." But she was not all right. She was sobbing into his chest, her small body shaking so violently he thought she might break apart. She was clutching his shirt so hard her knuckles were white. He held her, rocking slightly, as the last of the afternoon light faded from the barn. He held her as her grief poured out, a lifetime of it. The stones, the insults, the fear, the loneliness, her grandmother, the fire, all of it. After a long time, the sobs quieted. She was still clinging to him, her breath coming in ragged, shuddering gasps. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. The moment shifted. The air in the barn, thick with hay dust and her tears, became charged. It was no longer just comfort. His hand was still in her hair. Her face was still pressed against his chest. He could smell her, the scent of lavender from the garden mud and the clean, female scent of her skin. He could feel the warmth of her through his shirt, the softness of her breast pressed against his ribs. His own breath hitched. He was acutely, painfully aware of every point where their bodies touched. He could feel the small bones of her back under his arm. He lowered his head, his mouth near her ear. "Maria," he whispered. His breath was ragged. She tensed, but she did not pull away. She just stopped breathing. He could feel the pulse in her throat, fast and frantic, against his chin. He wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to turn his head, to press his lips to that pulse, to taste the salt of her tears. "You don't know," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "What they'll do to me." The words were ice. They cut through the heat, through the desperate fog that had enveloped them. She was right. He had no idea, but he was beginning to. She pulled back, slowly. She didn't pull far, just enough to look at him. Her face was a ruin. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks stained with mud and tears. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She looked at his mouth. He looked at hers. The moment held suspended for a heart-stopping, agonizing second. Then she pushed, her hands flat against his chest. "No," she whispered, and scrambled to her feet. She ran from the barn, leaving him kneeling in the hay, her scent on his clothes. The feel of her body burned into his. He was shaking, and for the first time since Silas died. It was not with anger, or with grief. It was with a terrible, desperate wanting, and a terrible, desperate fear. The children were found. They were found 2 days later, huddled in an old prospector's dugout, cold and hungry and sick with fear, but alive. The mercantile owner wept and gave thanks to God, and the town took a collective, shuddering breath. The fever had broken, but the sickness remained. The children had been found, yes, but they had been lost. They had been lost in the woods near her cabin, and the preacher, Reverend Josiah, made sure no one forgot it. The terror had been real, and the town, having tasted that righteous fear, was not ready to let it go. It had given them a common enemy. Elias saw it in their eyes when he walked into town. He had to. They were low on flour, salt, and kerosene. Mariel had given him the last of her egg money, a few coins tied in a cloth. He walked into the mercantile, the same one whose children had been lost, and the store went silent. The owner, Mr. Henderson, looked at Elias. His eyes were hollow. "I'm glad your children are safe," Elias said, his voice quiet. "No thanks to her," Henderson said, his voice flat. "She called to him. They said they heard her in the woods, whispering." "They were scared," Elias said, his hands clenching. "It was the wind." "Was it?" Henderson began weighing the flour. "And how is it, Rourke?" A voice boomed from the back of the store. "That you speak so easily for the devil's work?" Reverend Josiah stepped out from behind a stack of barrels. He was a tall, thin man, his black coat seeming to drink the light. "Reverend," Elias said, nodding. "You, who lives in sin with the witch. You, who protects her. You, who shares her bed in her blasphemies." The air crackled. "You're a man of God, Reverend," Elias said, his voice dangerously low. "You should be careful with lies. You might stain that black coat." "It is no lie." Josiah pointed a bony finger. "She has poisoned this town, and she has poisoned you. We see how you look, gaunt, cursed. She is a succubus, draining the life from this town, and from your very soul." Elias looked at the flour, then at the preacher. He felt the eyes of the other men in the store. He took the bag of flour from Henderson, setting the coins on the counter. "She is a healer," Elias said, turning to the preacher. "She healed Abe's boy. While you were praying, she was working. She's a better Christian than any of you." He had said the wrong thing. He saw it instantly. Abe, the blacksmith, who was in the corner looking at harnesses, went pale. He shrank into himself. The other men looked from Abe to Elias. The secret was out. "So," Josiah said, a slow, ugly smile spreading on his face. "She has her claws in him, too. She spreads her corruption." "She's a good woman," Elias said. He felt the old, familiar anger rising, the heat in his chest. "And you're a fool." He walked out. The silence followed him, heavier than a shroud. He was halfway to the livery when two men stepped out of the alley. It was Thorne's friends, the Weasley one who had knifed him, and another, broader man. "Heard you like him strange. Rourke," the Weasley one said. "His name was Jeb. Heard you like him dirty." Elias kept walking. "Get out of my way." "What's it like?" Jeb said, walking beside him, goading him. "Sleeping with a witch? Does she turn into a snake? Does she whisper your sins to her master?" The broader man laughed. "I'd like a taste of that myself. A bit of devil's pie." Elias stopped. He set the bag of flour down, carefully. "Go home," he said. "Or what?" the big man challenged, stepping in front of him. "Your witch ain't here to save you." "No," Elias said. "I'm here to save you from me." The fight was not like the one in the saloon. It was not a drunken brawl. It was cold. Elias hit the big man first. A straight, hard right to the jaw that snapped his head back. As the man staggered, Elias drove his left fist into his gut, doubling him over. Jeb, the weasel, pulled his knife again, but Elias was waiting for it. He grabbed Jeb's wrist, twisting it until the man screamed and the knife clattered on the boardwalk. Elias twisted harder, feeling the small bones grind. He pulled Jeb in close, his face inches from the terrified man. "If you ever," Elias growled, his voice a rasp, "ever speak her name again, if you ever walk on her path, I will finish what I started in that saloon. I will break you. Do you understand me?" Jeb, his face white with pain, nodded frantically. Elias threw him to the ground, picked up his flour, and walked away. He did not look back. The town did not just whisper about him now. They feared him. He was no longer just the stranger. He was the witch's man. He was armed. He was violent. And he was her protector. He had drawn a line in the dirt. And he and Marielle were on one side, and the rest of Dead Mare Gulch was on the other. The peace, false as it was, lasted 3 days. Then, the Hendersons' girl died. It was not the fever from before. It was a new sickness, a quick, wasting cough that turned to blood. The child, a girl of 6, was dead by morning. Grief, in a town like this, was a dry pine forest. The preacher was the lightning strike. This time, there was no deliberation. There was no quiet gathering. This time, it was a mob. Elias was reinforcing the cabin door when he heard them. A low rumble, the sound of many boots and many voices, angry and afraid. He looked out the window. They were coming up the path, 20 or 30 of them. They had torches, though it was barely dusk. They had guns, and at the front, a man carried a coiled rope. Marielle was standing by the hearth, grinding herbs. She had been grinding the same herbs for an hour, the stone pestle moving round and round, a nervous, repetitive motion. She stopped. The silence in the cabin was suddenly awful. "They're here," she said. It was not a question. "Stay back," Elias said. He unbarred the door and stepped onto the porch, blocking the entrance. He held his axe. The mob stopped 20 feet from the porch. They were a sea of angry, twisted faces, lit by the flickering torchlight. Reverend Josiah was at the front, his face a mask of righteousness. Sheriff Brody was with him, his face grim, his hand on his holster. "Elias Rourke," the sheriff called out. His voice was steady, but tired. "Stand aside. You have no business here." "Sheriff?" Elias said. "A child is dead," a woman shrieked from the crowd. "She killed her with her black magic." "Brody!" Elias kept his eyes on the sheriff. "You know this is wrong." "What I know," the sheriff said, "is that a child is dead, and the town wants justice." "This isn't justice," Elias spat. "This is a lynching." "This is God's will," Josiah shrieked. "She is a plague. She brought the sickness. She hexed the Henderson girl. She must be cleansed." "You're murderers," Elias said, raising the axe. "It's over, Rourke," the sheriff said. He stepped forward. "I'm giving you one chance. Stand aside, or we will move you." "She's done nothing. He's under her spell," Josiah screamed. "The whore of Babylon. She uses her body. She uses her spells to weaken men. Look at him. He's her devil's shield." The accusation, so vile, hung in the air. Elias saw Marielle flinch behind him. The sheriff raised his hand for quiet. "Marielle, you can come out, or we will burn you out." The door opened. Marielle stepped onto the porch, standing beside Elias. She was pale, but her head was high. She looked, in that moment, like a queen. "I have done nothing," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden quiet. "Liar! Witch!" The sheriff held up his hand. "It don't matter. The town has decided I am giving you till Sunday morning. If you are still in this valley when that sun comes up, I cannot stop them. I will not stop them. They will come here, and they will see you hang. That is my final word." He turned. "Go home," he said to the mob. "Go home. It is settled. Sunday." The crowd grumbled, but they obeyed. They wanted the ritual. They wanted the hanging. The preacher looked disappointed. He had wanted a fire tonight, but he, too, turned. They stalked back down the path, their torches and their hate fading into the trees. Elias and Marielle stood on the porch until the last light was gone. Elias barred the door. The sound of the heavy wood sliding into place was final. He turned to her. The cabin was suffocating. "We're leaving," he said. She was standing by the window, staring into the blackness. "No." "What?" He could not believe what he was hearing. "Marielle, did you not hear him? They are coming back. With a rope." "I heard him." "Then pack your things. We'll leave tonight. Now. I'll steal a horse. 2 horses. We'll ride north." "No," she said again, her voice stronger. "Why?" he yelled, his frustration boiling over. "Why? Do you want to die?" She turned to face him, and her eyes were not empty this time. They were full of a cold, hard anger that matched his own. "Do you think this is the only town? Elias, do you think this valley holds all the hate in the world? We can find another." "There is no other." She walked to the hearth, touched the cold stones. "This is my land, my grandmother's. Her bones are in that ground. If I run," she said, her voice dropping, "I'll be hunted. They'll say I ran because I was guilty. They'll send men. They'll find me. I'll die in the mud, in a ditch, like a dog." She looked at him, and he saw the terrible, broken logic of it. "If I stay," she whispered, "at least I die on my land. At least I die facing them." "That's not bravery," he said, his voice raw. "That's pride. That's suicide. It is all I have left." She turned away from him. The argument was over. He slammed his fist against the wall. The cabin was a trap. They were two animals, caught and waiting for the hunter. Night fell. The deadline of Sunday felt like a lifetime, and like no time at all. He sat on the floor, his back to the barred door, the axe in his lap. She sat in her chair, staring at the empty hearth. The hours passed, marked only by the creak of the cabin settling. Then, the thunder came. It was not a gentle rumble. It was a crack, a split in the sky, so loud it shook the very foundations of the small house. A flash of lightning lit the room, freezing Mariel in her chair, her face a white mask of terror. The rain came, a sudden, violent deluge, hammering the roof. Another crash of thunder, this one making the jars on her shelves rattle. Mariel made a small sound, a gasp, a whimper. Elias was on his feet. "Mariel?" She was shaking. Her hands were covering her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. "It's starting," she whispered. "The fire. It's starting." The storm was not a comfort to her. It was the dream. It was the torches, the shouting, the fire. He crossed the small room in 2 strides. He knelt in front of her. "It's not," he said, his voice rough, trying to cut through her panic. "It's just the rain. Mariel, look at me. It's just the rain." He put his hands on her arms. She was ice cold, trembling violently. "No," she sobbed, rocking back and forth. "No, no, no." He did the only thing he could. He pulled her out of the chair, pulled her to her feet, and into his arms. He held her. He held her tightly, his arms a vice. "It's just the storm," he said, his mouth against her hair. "I'm here. I won't let them." But she was lost in the terror. He picked her up, her small weight nothing, and carried her the few feet to her cot. He sat down, holding her in his lap like a child, rocking her as the storm raged outside, as her own storm raged inside. He lay back, pulling her with him, pulling the quilt over them both. He was fully dressed, his boots still on. He was on top of the covers. She was under them, but they were together. He held her, his body a shield, his hands stroking her hair. "I've got you," he whispered, over and over. "I've got you." The storm raged for an hour, and slowly, the trembling in her body eased, her sobs quieted. The rigid terror seeped out of her, replaced by a simple, human warmth. They lay in the darkness. The only sounds were the rain and their breathing. His arm was under her head, his other hand splayed on her back. He could feel her heart beating, fast but steady, against his ribs. The air in the cot was warm, thick with their breathing, with her scent of pine and lavender. The comfort shifted. It became something else, something heavy and hot. He turned his head. In the faint, gray light from the window, he could see her face. She was looking at him. Her eyes were wide, dark pools, no longer filled with terror, but with something he could not name. He felt like he was drowning. He was drowning in her, in the cabin, in the rain, in the hopelessness. He was drowning in the memory of Silas, the failure. He was drowning in his own uselessness. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, hungry act. It was the kiss of a man who was already dead, trying to taste life one last time. It was all his anger, all his fear, all his failure, poured into one act. She stiffened. He felt her whole body go rigid. He felt the fear come back, but then she melted. She trembled beneath him, a violent, full-body tremor, and her mouth, which had been a line of terror, softened. She wanted this. She was afraid, but she was wanting. Her hands, which had been fists at her sides, came up. They did not push him away. They gripped the front of his shirt, just as they had in the barn. But this time, she pulled. She pulled him closer. He broke the kiss, gasping, his forehead pressing against hers. Rain hammered the roof. "Don't," she panted, her voice cracking. "Don't. Pity me, Elias. I don't want your pity." He let out a breath, a rough, broken sound that was almost a laugh. "Pity?" His voice was thick. He kissed her forehead, her eyes, her temple. "Mariel." He pulled back, just enough to see her. "I've seen men face armies. I've seen men walk into fire. You're the strongest person I have ever known." That broke her. He felt a different kind of sob rise in her chest. He kissed her again, and this time, it was different. It was not the desperate kiss of a drowning man. It was slow. It was trembling. It was a question. She answered. He fumbled with the buttons on her nightgown. His hands were shaking. She fumbled with the buttons on his shirt. They were clumsy, desperate. Two people in the dark trying to find each in the last moments of the world. He pulled the quilt away. His hands, rough and calloused, moved over her skin. He felt the goosebumps, the heat. He felt scars, a long, thin, healed line on her ribs, a small, puckered mark on her shoulder. He kissed them. He kissed the scars, as if he could heal them, as if he could take away the pain that put them there. He found her mouth again. This was not about pity. It was not about strength. It was not even about desire. It was about life. It was a desperate, defiant act of living, a fire lit against the dark, cold world that was waiting to kill them. She was trembling, but she met his desperation with her own. She was not a victim. She was a participant. She was a survivor. After, they lay tangled, their bodies slick with sweat, the cabin air cold around them. The storm was easing, the thunder a distant rumble. He held her, his arm heavy and warm across her stomach. She cried. It was quiet, a silent, steady weeping, her shoulders shaking in the dark. He did not ask why. He did not ask if she was all right. He knew she was not. He just held her. He pressed his lips to the back of her head and held her, his own body an anchor against the grief. He felt her take a deep, shuddering breath. "My mother," she whispered into the darkness. Her voice was raw, broken. Elias just held her, listening. "She was not my grandmother's daughter. She was beautiful. My grandmother said she looked like a painting. White skin, hair like corn silk." She paused, gathering herself. "My grandmother found her, alone, near the river. She had been hurt by trappers. They took her. They used her. And they left her. My grandmother took her in, healed her." Elias felt his jaw clench, a murderous, cold rage building in him. "She was pregnant," Mariel whispered. "With me. She never recovered. Not in her mind. She lived, but she was gone. She died when I was born. My grandmother said she just let go. She said she died of a broken will." She turned in his arms, her small, warm body shifting to face him. He could feel her tears on his chest. "My grandmother," she said. "She loved me, but she was afraid. She was so afraid. She saw my mother in me. She told me my body was dangerous, that it was a lure, that what happened to my mother, it was because she was beautiful. She said desire brought ruin. She said it was the fire that burns women down." Elias's eyes were wet. He understood. He understood her fear. He understood her loneliness. He understood her refusal to run. She had been running her whole life. He held her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping at her tears. "She was wrong," he said, his voice thick. "It's not the fire that burns you. It's the fire that keeps you alive." She looked at him, her eyes searching his in the dark. He kissed her, gently this time. A promise. "We're leaving," he said. It was not a question. She didn't say no. "Sunday," he said. "They're waiting for Sunday," he thought, his mind clear and sharp for the first time in months. "That gives me tomorrow. I'll go north. I'll scout a path, up into the mountains, where the snow comes early. They won't follow us there." He looked at her, his eyes boring into hers. "I'll take you somewhere the snow will hide us forever." He remembered her dream. "I'll take you," he whispered, "to where the wolves run." She closed her eyes, a long, shuddering sigh escaping her. She nodded. "Just once." "Tomorrow," she whispered. her voice full of a terrible, fragile hope. "You'll go tomorrow." Dawn broke gray and unforgiving. It was Saturday. Sunday was a death sentence. Elias rose from the cot, the warmth of Marielle's body a stark contrast to the cold dread in his gut. She was still asleep, or pretending to be, her face pale, exhaustion carved into the delicate lines around her mouth. He looked at her for a long moment, the quiet intensity of her sleeping face, and felt a surge of something so fierce it almost stole his breath. It was not pity. It was a terrible, protective rage. "I'm going," he whispered. He did not touch her, afraid the spell of their fragile hope would break. He slipped out of the cabin into the pre-dawn chill. The air was wet and heavy from the night storm, the ground a sucking mire. He had one day to find a path, one day to secure a horse, one day to get them out. He skirted the town, moving through the thick pine woods, his feet silent on the bed of wet needles. He headed north, toward the mountains that loomed like jagged, dark teeth against the graying sky. He needed the high ground. He needed to find a game trail, an old mining pass, anything that did not lead back to Dead Mare Gulch. His mind worked, sharp and clear. He needed a horse, not just one, but two. But two was a risk. One, he could manage. One good, strong horse. They could ride double. He knew where he had to go. Hezekiah Dunn's livery. It was a risk, a terrible one, but it was the only way. He would go on his way back. He would scout the path first, then steal the horse on his return. Under cover of the afternoon slowing business, he found the path. It was an old animal track, barely wide enough for a single rider, winding up through the scree and rocks. It was steep, but it was solid. It led to a high ridge, and from there, he could see. The valley of Dead Mare Gulch was a small, ugly scar below. To the north, the mountains rolled away, vast and empty, the peaks already dusted with the first promise of snow. "Where the wolves run," he whispered, tasting the hope. It was real. He could get her there. He could hide them. He stayed for only a few minutes, committing the path to memory, and then scrambled back down. It was past noon when he reached the edge of town, his stomach hollow, his nerves stretched tight. He moved like a ghost, keeping to the gulches and washes, until he was behind the livery. Dunn's stable was quiet. The Saturday drunks were not yet out, the decent folk at home. Elias slipped over the back fence of the corral, landing soft in the manure. He picked his horse with a cold, professional eye. Not the showy bay, but a solid, short-backed dun, built for endurance. He found a saddle, a bridle, a canteen, and a sack of oats. His movements quick, economical. He led the horse from the stall. He was halfway across the yard when a voice stopped him. She ain't what they say." Elias froze. He turned, his hand dropping to the knife he still carried. It was a boy, not a boy, really, a youth, 16, maybe 17. He was thin, with a shock of straw-colored hair. Elias recognized him. It was the stable boy, the one whose leg Marielle had healed, Thomas, Abe and Sarah's son. The boy's leg was straight. He walked with no limp. He was holding a pitchfork, but it was shaking. I seen you," the boy stammered. "I seen you from the loft." "Go back to sleep, kid," Elias said, his voice a low growl. "You didn't see anything." "She healed me," the boy said, his voice cracking. "I heard him. I heard my PA. He said the preacher was wrong, but he was too scared to say it. He said she smelled like mint, not sulfur." Elias stared at the boy. Here was one person. "I can't let you take the horse, Mr. Rourke," the boy said, standing straighter. "You can't stop me. No, sir, I mean, you can't take that one." The boy pointed with his chin. "That's Mr. Dunn's personal ride. He'll raise a posse before you're 2 miles gone. Take the sorrel. She's faster. And take this." The boy, Thomas, ducked back into the tack room. He came back with a rifle. a Winchester, and a box of cartridges. "It's my pa's. He left it here for a repair. He won't mind, I don't think." Elias was stunned. He took the rifle. The weight of it was a comfort, a solid, lethal reality. "Why? She ain't what they say," the boy repeated, his eyes filling with tears. "You get her out of here, mister. You get her out. They're all crazy." "Thank you, Thomas," Elias said. He meant it. He swapped the tack, led the sorrel out, and mounted. He looked down at the boy. "You're a good man. Godspeed, Mr. Rourke," the boy whispered. Elias rode. He did not take the main path. He rode through the woods, the stolen rifle a cold promise in his grip. Hope was no longer a fragile thing. It was a horse, a gun, and a path. He should have known it was too easy. While Elias found his path, Mariel sat in the cabin, a prisoner of the quiet. The silence was worse than the shouting. It was a waiting silence, the silence of the woods before the predator strikes. She had tried to pack. She had folded her grandmother's shawl, a small book of pressed flowers, her pestle. But what was the point? She could not pack the smell of the pine trees or the feel of the earth under her feet. She could not pack her grandmother's grave. She was standing at the window when they came. It was not the full mob. It was a smaller group, 6, maybe 7 men. The sheriff was with them, but he was not leading. Reverend Josiah was, and Mr. Henderson, the mercantile owner, his face a mask of gray, empty grief. They were not coming to the door. They were marching up the small hill just outside her fence line, the one that overlooked her cabin. They were carrying something, a cross. 2 large pieces of timber, crudely nailed together. Mariel's blood went cold. She could not move. She could not breathe. She watched as they dug a hole, as they set the cross, as they tamped the dirt around its base. It was a mockery, a threat, a promise. They wouldn't," she whispered. But they were. Reverend Josiah held up a torch. He said words she could not hear, his arm raised to the gray sky. He touched the torch to the base of the cross, which had been wrapped in oil-soaked rags. It went up with a whoosh. The flames licked at the wood, orange and black against the sky. Mariel felt the heat on her face. Even through the glass, she backed away from the window, her hand flying to her mouth, a scream building in her throat. The dream. The fire. She stumbled back, knocking over her chair. She looked around the small cabin. Her home. It was not a home. It was a tinderbox. It was a coffin. A splat, a thud. Something wet hit the porch. She crept to the door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. She looked through the peephole her grandmother had drilled. A dead crow, its neck broken, was nailed to her door. Its black eyes, dull and empty, stared back at her. "A familiar," she heard Josiah shout, his voice triumphant. "Behold, she sends her spies, but God is watchful." Another sound, the splintering of wood. They were not just warning her, they were destroying. She heard the sound of her fence being torn down, the thud of her woodpile being kicked over, and then a crash. They had broken the window. She screamed. She ran, not for the door. She knew that was what they wanted. She ran to the small, braided rug in the center of the room. She clawed at it, pulling it back, revealing the trap door. She pulled it open, her fingers raw, and scrambled down the short ladder into the darkness. The root cellar. It was damp, smelling of earth and potatoes and the apples she had stored. She pulled the door closed over her head, plunging herself into absolute, cold darkness. She heard them. They were inside, the crash of her shelves, the shattering of her jars, the sound of her grandmother's books being torn, the pages ripped out. They were laughing. They were calling her names. Witch, whore, Apache filth. She curled into a ball in the dirt, her hands over her ears, and she wept. She wept for her herbs, for her books, for her home. She wept for the girl she had been, the woman she was, and the death she could no longer escape. Elias saw the smoke first. It was not the smoke of a chimney. It was black, oily smoke, rising from the hill above her cabin. "No," he said. The word was ripped from his throat. He spurred the sorrel, crashing through the woods, not caring about the noise. "No, no, no!" He burst into the clearing and his world stopped. A cross, black and smoldering, was planted on the hill. A desecration. Her fence was gone. Her garden, already ruined, was now just a field of mud and broken wood. And the crow, nailed to her door. He fell from the horse, the rifle in his hand. "Mariel." He kicked the door open. It hung on one hinge. The cabin was gone. Not burned, but destroyed. Everything was shattered. Her herbs were scattered, mixed with the dirt and glass from her broken jars. Her books were in a pile, torn and spat upon. Her small cot was overturned, the quilt slashed. "Mariel!" His voice was a raw shout of panic. He ran through the small space, his boots crunching on the wreckage. "Mariel!" She was not there. He ran back outside, his heart a cold stone. He looked at the smoldering cross. "Sunday," he spat. "He said Sunday." They had lied. He stood in the center of the ruin, his mind racing. Where? Where would she go? The woods? He looked at the tree line. It was too vast, and then he saw it. The braided rug, kicked into a corner. And the trapdoor, just visible, a dark square in the floorboards. He lunged for it, his hands shaking. He pulled at the ring. "Mariel, are you in there? Mariel, it's me! It's Elias!" He heard a small, terrified sound from below. He pulled the door open. It was dark. He dropped to his knees. "Mariel, come out. It's safe. It's me." A pale face looked up at him from the blackness. Her eyes were wide, vacant with terror. Her hair was full of dirt and bits of straw. "Elias," she whispered, as if he were a ghost. "I'm here." He reached down. "I'm here. Come on." She took his hand. He pulled her up. She did not just climb out. She fell out, collapsing against him. Her body shaking so violently, he could barely hold her. He held her. He buried his face in her dirty hair, his arms crushing her to him. "I've got you," he said. The words a prayer, a promise. "I've got you. They're gone. I'm here." She did not cry. She just shook, a long, silent, body-racking tremor. She was broken. They, she stammered, clinging to his shirt. "I know," he said, his voice a low, murderous growl. "I know." He looked at the rifle in his hand. He wanted to go. He wanted to ride into town and burn it to the ground, but her life was in his arms. "We're leaving," he said. "Now. Tonight. We're not waiting for Sunday." He pulled her away, holding her face in his hands. "Look at me. Mariel, we are leaving. I have a horse. I have a gun. I have a path. We are going right now." The blankness in her eyes faded, replaced by a tiny, flickering spark. "A horse? A good one. And a rifle." He showed her. "We'll ride double. We'll be in the mountains by dawn. They'll never find us." He helped her to her feet. "Get your shawl, whatever you need." She looked at the ruin. "There's nothing," she whispered. She walked to the pile of torn books and picked up one small, leather-bound volume that had somehow survived. She tucked it into the bodice of her dress. She grabbed her grandmother's shawl from the floor. "That's all," she said. "Good," he said. "Let's go." He helped her onto the sorrel, then swung up behind her, settling her in front of him. He wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her close. The rifle was in his other hand. "Hold on," he said. He did not take the path. He urged the horse into the trees, toward the north, toward the ridge he had scouted. They moved slowly, the horse picking its way through the darkness. The woods were black, the moon not yet risen. They rode for an hour. Elias could feel her, rigid with fear. In his arms, but with every step the horse took, he felt the hope rise. They were doing it. They were getting away. They came to the pass. It was darker here, the rock walls rising on either side. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the way out." And then the horse stopped. It whinnied, a high, nervous sound, and shied, backing up. "Whoa, easy." Elias said, trying to gentle the animal. "What is it?" Mariel whispered. "I don't know." He squinted into the darkness. The path was blocked. A large, dark shape. A tree? No, not a tree. He smelled it. The copper tang of blood. His blood ran cold. He dismounted, pushing Mariel behind him. "Stay here. Stay on the horse." He walked forward, the rifle raised. He got close enough to see. It was a horse. His horse. The dun. The one he had left in the woods. The one he had planned to... He looked closer. No, it was not the dun. It was the sorrel. The one he was... He turned. He had been holding the reins. He had been on the horse. He looked at his hand. The reins were... gone. "Elias," Mariel said, her voice a thin thread of terror. He was standing alone in the pass. The horse was gone. Mariel was gone. Mariel, he was wrong. His mind was playing tricks. He looked again. He was still on the horse. Mariel was in front of him. The sorrel was still breathing, but the other horse, the dun, the one he'd first tried to steal, it was here, dead, slaughtered, blocking the pass. "Elias," Mariel whispered, pointing. He saw them. Tracks. Not just his, not just the horse's. Boots. 3, maybe 4 sets. They had been here. They had waited for him. They had watched him scout the pass. They knew. A twig snapped. Behind them. Back toward the town. "They're watching us," Mariel whispered, her voice breaking. "They've been watching us." "They're hurting us," Elias said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. They hadn't wanted him to leave. They were toying with him. With her. They wanted the show. They wanted the hanging. He grabbed the reins, yanking the sorrel's head around, and kicked it, hard. He abandoned the pass, crashing back into the trees, pushing the horse, reckless, through the underbrush. He did not know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away from the path. Branches whipped at their faces. The horse stumbled, recovered. Mariel clung to him, her face buried in his back. "Where are we going?" she cried. "Away," he said. He rode until the horse was lathered, until he was hopelessly, utterly lost in the darkness. He finally stopped in a small clearing, the horse's breath coming in ragged, steaming gasps. "They're everywhere," he said. He slid off the horse, pulling Mariel down. "They're hunting us. What do we do?" she asked. She was not crying. Her voice was cold. Elias looked around. The air was cold. The wind was picking up. He had to think. "A fire," he said. "They'll see it. They'll see the one I want them to see." He took the axe from the saddle. He began gathering wood. "This will be our decoy. We'll set it here. They'll see the smoke. They'll come for it. And us? We hide." He looked around, frantic. The clearing was bounded by a sheer rock face, and in it, a shadow, a crack. "There," he said. It was a cave. Or not a cave, but a deep fissure in the rock, blasted by lightning centuries ago. It was barely wide enough for them to squeeze into, but it was deep, and it was dark. "In here," he said. He pushed her in first. "Stay here. Don't make a sound." He ran back, gathered a pile of damp leaves and wood, and set the fire. It took him precious minutes, his hands shaking, but finally it caught. A small, smoky fire. He threw the sorrel's saddle blanket near it. "Come on," he said, pulling the horse with him. He led it 100 yards away, tied it to a tree where it would be found, but not immediately. He slapped its rump. "Go!" Then he ran back. He scrambled into the fissure, pulling Mariel back into the deepest, darkest part of the rock. "Now we wait," he whispered. They waited. It was an eternity. The cold seeped into their bones, a damp, living cold. They sat in the dark, their shoulders pressed together, listening. Mariel was shaking again. Not from fear, this time, from the cold. Elias put his arms around her, pulling her close, trying to lend her his warmth. "It's all right," he whispered, his lips against her hair. "It's not." she said. They sat in silence. After what felt like hours, he heard something. Voices. Men. "Look! The fire! And the blanket! They're here! Spread out! Find the witch!" The voices were close. Elias held his breath. He could feel Mariel's heart pounding against his. A man walked right past the entrance to their cave, his torch casting a flickering, grotesque light on the opposite wall. "Nothing over here," he shouted. They waited. The voices faded, moving off, following the decoy. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. They were safe. For now. "They'll be back," Mariel whispered in the darkness. "I know." They were trapped in a hole in the rock, waiting for dawn, waiting for the hangman. Mariel's hand, small and cold, found his. She didn't just hold it. She began to trace the rough, calloused lines of his palm. Then, slowly, she moved her hand up his arm, over his shoulder. He tensed. She found the back of his shirt, the place where the fabric was thinner, where the skin was different. She touched his scar. He flinched, a sharp, involuntary movement. He had never let anyone touch it. He had never spoken of it. Her fingers were light, tracing the raised, ropey flesh through the thin cotton. It was not a sexual touch. It was not a pitying one. It was curious. It was a question, asked in the dark. "Silas," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My brother, it was a whip, a bar fight. I tried to pull him out. I took the hits for him." She just traced the scar, back and forth. "I failed him," Elias said. The confession ripped from his gut. "I failed him then, and I failed him in Arizona. I'm a failure. Mariel, I'm the man who fails to protect the people he loves." Her hand stopped. She took his, the one not holding the rifle, and turned it over, and then she did something that shattered him. She kissed his palm. It was a soft, warm press of her lips against his skin. A benediction, an absolution. He looked at her in the darkness, but he could not see her face. He could only feel her. "You're not cursed, Mariel," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. "You're not a witch. You're the only thing keeping me alive." She put his hand against her cold cheek and held it there. And together, they waited for the dawn. Dawn came. It was Sunday. They were cold, stiff, and hopeless. They crawled out of the cave. The woods were silent. The hunters were gone. "They're waiting," Elias said. He knew. They had gone back to town, back to their righteous God, to prepare for the hanging. "We have to go back," Mariel said. "No, we can still—" "Where, Elias?" she said, her voice flat. "Back to the blocked pass, back to the woods, where they are hunting us like animals. There is nowhere to go. It's over." He knew she was right. They walked back. It was the longest walk of his life. They walked back to the cabin, to the ruin, to the smoldering cross. The town was waiting, but they were not in the town. They were at the cabin. The entire population of Dead Mare Gulch was gathered in her clearing. Around the black cross, the preacher, Josiah, was standing on a barrel. He had worked them into a fury. "And the sun rises on the day of judgment," he was screaming, his arms raised. "The Lord has delivered the witch into our hands. She has been tried by her own fear and found guilty. She has been tried by the death of our children and found guilty. And now she will be tried by fire and rope." "Elias," Mariel whispered, grabbing his arm. But it was too late. They had been seen. "There!" a man shouted. "The devil and his bride!" The crowd turned. It was not a crowd. It was a single ugly beast with many heads. It surged toward them. "Run!" Elias said. But Mariel stood her ground. "No," she said. "I die on my land." "Then I die with you." He raised the rifle. "Elias." "No." He was a fool. He thought he could fight them all. He got one shot off, a warning shot into the air before they were on him. He fought. He fought like a cornered wolf. He used the rifle as a club. He used his fists. He used his feet. He took 2 men down, felt the crack of a jaw under his knuckles, but they were too many. A blow from behind, a club or a gun butt, hit him in the back of the head. The world exploded in white light. He fell to his knees. Another blow, to his side, to his face. He heard Marielle scream his name. He saw her, through the forest of legs. They had her. Thorn! The big man from the saloon was holding her. His huge, filthy hand clamped over her mouth. They were tying her hands. They were laughing. Marielle! He roared, trying to get up. A boot kicked him in the stomach. He gagged, falling forward. He was disarmed, beaten, helpless. "Lock him in the barn," the sheriff's voice said, flat and final. "He can watch." They dragged him. His hands were bound. They threw him into the small, dark barn. The one he had slept in, the one where he had held her. They slammed the door and he heard the heavy sound of a bar dropping into place. He was in darkness. He scrambled to the cracked window, the one he had peered through. Watching her, he could see. He could see it all. They were dragging her. They were tying her to the smoldering cross. Her hair was loose. Her dress was torn. She was not fighting. She was just staring at the sky. Elias slammed his bound fists against the wall. He roared, a sound of pure, animalistic agony. They were going to kill her, and he was locked in a barn. He had failed. He had failed her, just as he had failed Silas. He was, and always had been, too late. Marielle was not in the clearing. She was not tied to a cross. She was somewhere else. They put her in the town's lockup, a small stone box with one barred window and a solid oak door. It smelled of rust and despair. It was not dusk. It was still morning. The preacher, it seemed, wanted the crowd to simmer. He wanted the anticipation. The trial would be at dusk. The hanging would follow. She sat on the floor, her back against the cold, damp stone. She was alone. The terror was gone. The hope was gone. All that was left was a strange, cold calm. She looked at the sliver of light coming through the window, and she remembered. It was not a dream. It was a memory. She was small, 6 or 7. It was a winter night, much like the one that had just passed. There had been a sickness. A cow had died. The town had been afraid. Her grandmother had not been a witch. She had been an old, brown-skinned woman who knew too much, who lived too freely. They came, just as they had come for Marielle, with torches, with ropes, with hate. Her grandmother had hidden her, not in the root cellar, in the wood pile. She had buried her in the snow and the wood, and told her not to make a sound, no matter what. And Marielle had watched. She had watched through a crack in the logs as they dragged her grandmother from the cabin. She had watched as they tied her, not to a cross, but to the big pine tree in the center of the clearing. She had watched as the preacher, a different preacher then, but with the same eyes, the same voice, condemned her. And she had watched as they lit the fire. She had not made a sound. She had stayed in the woodpile, her small body frozen, as her grandmother burned. She had smelled the smoke. She had heard the screams. She thought she had escaped it. She had lived her whole life in the shadow of that fire, terrified, alone, waiting for it to come for her. She had been wrong. She had not escaped it. She had just been waiting her turn. The cold calm settled over her. She closed her eyes. She was her grandmother's daughter. After all, she would die on her land, and she would die, as she had lived, alone. He was in the dark. The barn was a cage of old wood and the smell of hay, but the only thing Elias could see was the sliver of graying, angry light from the window. He was on his feet, his hands bound tight behind him, his shoulders screaming from where the bar had dropped. He pressed his face to the crack, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. He had watched them drag her away. Not to the cross, not yet. They had dragged her to the jail, the small stone box in the center of town. They wanted to savor this. They wanted to let the anticipation build, to let the whole, hateful town gather for the dusk trial. He was a failure. The word echoed in the empty barn. He had failed Silas. And now, he had failed Mariel. He had brought her this, his defiance, his fights, his presence. He was the man of violence the preacher had named, and he had made Mariel the witch who consorted with him. He slammed his head back against the rough-hewn boards. The pain was a dull, distant throb compared to the fire in his gut. He was tied. He was beaten. And she was alone. Hours passed. He measured the time by the shifting color of the light. It went from the gray of morning to the flat, pale white of noon. He heard the town. He heard men shouting, heard the sound of a hammer on wood, a sound that made his stomach clench. They were building something, a gallows, or reinforcing the cross. He pulled at the ropes. The hemp cut into his wrists, drawing fresh blood, but it did not give. He was a bull in a trap, and the butchers were sharpening their knives. The light began to yellow, then deepen to a bruised orange. Dusk. A sound. Not from the town. From the side of the barn. A scrape. A whisper. "Mr. Rourke?" Elias froze. He pressed his face to the crack, trying to see. "Mr. Rourke, are you in there?" It was a boy's voice. Young. Terrified. "Thomas," Elias whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He heard a frantic fumbling at the door, the heavy scrape of the outer bar being lifted. The door creaked open 6 inches. Thomas, the stable boy, slipped inside, his face pale as milk, his eyes wide with a fear that matched Elias's own. He was clutching Elias's knife. They're gathering," the boy panted, sawing at the ropes on Elias's wrists. "At the clearing, the preacher. He's gone mad. He's saying the storm is a sign, that God is angry." The ropes fell away. Elias grabbed the boy by the shoulders, his hands shaking with a desperate, sudden hope. "The storm? It's coming. A bad one." Thomas pushed the knife into Elias's hand. I'm sorry. I couldn't get your rifle. It doesn't matter. The horse, the sorrel. They took her. Mr. Dunn has her. But I brought this." Thomas pulled Elias toward the back of the barn, to a small, hidden door Elias had never known was there. It was covered in hay. Outside, hitched to a post in the alley, was a wagon, a simple, sturdy buckboard, 2 mules stamped nervously in the traces. "It's the best I could do," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. "It's Mr. Henderson's, from the mercantile. I just took it. They're all at the clearing. No one saw." Elias stared at the wagon. It was not a horse. It was not fast, but it was heavy. It was a battering ram, and it had cover. "Thomas," Elias said, his voice rough. "Why?" The boy looked up, and for a second, the fear was gone, replaced by a simple, profound certainty. She's not what they say. Elias gripped the boy's shoulder. "Get home. Lock your door. Don't come out. Mr. Rourke, they're gonna kill her." "Not while I'm breathing." Elias checked the wagon. A coil of rope, a canvas tarp, an axe. He took the axe. He climbed onto the seat, his hands tight on the reins. "Godspeed," the boy whispered, and vanished back into the shadows. Elias did not go straight. He did not charge. He took the wagon down the back alley, the wheels grinding in the dirt, the mules pulling steady. He cut through the woods, a long, slow circle, his mind a cold, clear map of what had to happen. He knew the clearing. He knew the path. He would come at them not from the town, but from the trees. The sky was a sight. The sun was a bleeding, red slit on the horizon, but to the west, a wall of pure, bruised black cloud was rising, swallowing the world. The air was dead, still, and heavy, the kind of quiet that comes before a cannon shot, and in the distance, the first low, gut-vibrating rumble of thunder. He reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. He tied the mules, his hands steady. He crept forward, the axe in his hand, and he saw the whole town was there. Every man, woman, and child, their faces pale and strange in the torchlight. They formed a half-circle, a crescent of hate, and in the center, On the small hill was the cross, and she was on it. They had tied her to it. Her arms were stretched wide, bound to the crossbeam, her feet lashed to the main post. She was not a woman. She was an offering. Her hair, dark and wet, was it rain or sweat, was plastered to her face. Her head hung, her chin on her chest. Her dress was torn. Her wrists were wrapped in so much rope they were a bloody, raw mess. Reverend Josiah was at the base of the cross, his Bible in his hand. He was screaming, but Elias could not hear the words. He could only hear the wind, which was picking up a high, mournful whine in the pines. "The witch!" Josiah's voice suddenly carried on a gust of wind. "The harlot! The blight! She has called the storm! She has brought the devil's own breath to our town, and we will send her back to her master!" He held up a torch. "No," Elias whispered. He ran back to the wagon. He untied the mules. He climbed onto the seat. He held the reins in one hand, the axe in the other. He took a deep breath. "And as God burned Sodom," Josiah screamed, "we will burn the witch. We will cleanse this land." He touched the torch to the pile of oil-soaked wood at the base of the cross. Whoosh! The fire caught. It licked up, orange and greedy, at the wood, at her feet. Mariel screamed. It was not a human sound. It was a high, thin, animal shriek of pure terror and agony. It was the sound of her grandmother's memory. It was the sound that shattered Elias's soul. "Hi-ya!" he roared. He cracked the reins, and the mules, terrified by the fire and the scream, lunged. The wagon burst from the trees. It came on them at a run, the heavy wheels churning, the wagon bed rattling like a war drum. The crowd turned. Their faces, lit by the fire, were a sea of white, startled moons. They screamed. They scattered. Elias did not stop. He aimed the wagon straight for the fire, straight for the preacher. Josiah, his eyes wide with blasphemous terror, dove out of the way. The wagon hit the fire. It crashed into the burning pyre, the heavy wheels scattering the logs, the mules screaming as the heat hit them. It slammed into the base of the cross, the sound a dull, sickening thud. The cross, its base already weakened by the fire, groaned. It tilted. Elias was off the wagon before it stopped moving. He had the axe. He ran through the smoldering, scattered wood. "Rourke!" a man shouted. It was Thorne. He had a gun. Elias did not stop. He swung the axe. Not at Thorne. At the ropes. He swung it, the blade biting deep into the post, severing the ropes that held her feet. A shot. It rang out, deafeningly loud. Elias felt a white-hot poker sear his left arm. He stumbled, but did not fall. He looked up. Mariel's head was up. Her eyes were open, wide, unseeing. "Elias," she breathed. "I've got you," he roared. He jumped onto the wagon bed. Using it to reach her arms, he swung the axe again, once, twice, severing the thick ropes at her wrists. She fell. He caught her, his good arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her from the cross, from the fire. He half dragged, half carried her back to the wagon. The crowd was reforming. They were over their shock. They were angry. "He's the devil!" Josiah shrieked, his face black with soot and rage. "He's come for his whore! Shoot them! Shoot them both!" Thorne raised his pistol again. Elias shoved Mariel into the wagon bed, behind him. "Stay down!" He turned to face them. He was bleeding. He was unarmed, save for the axe. The whole town of Dead Mare Gulch stood before him, and then the sky split open. It was not a rumble. It was a crack, a solid wall of sound that slammed into the clearing. A bolt of lightning, white and blinding, struck the great pine tree at the edge of the clearing, the one where her grandmother... The tree exploded. It split down the middle, fire and splinters raining down. The crowd screamed. This was not God's will, this was Armageddon. Elias Rourke stood in the wagon bed, his arm bleeding, his hair soaked by the first, sudden deluge of rain. He was framed by the fire of the burning logs, and the fire of the burning tree, and the white, jagged lightning that tore the sky. He raised his bloody arm, the axe still in his hand. "You want a witch?" he roared, his voice seeming to join the thunder. You want to see the devil? He pointed at Josiah. He pointed at Thorn. He pointed at the whole, cowering, terrified crowd. You're the devils. You're the darkness. You're the ones who burn women. You want a devil? He beat his chest with his good hand. You'll have to shoot the devil who loves her first. There was a moment of perfect, terrifying silence. Just the roar of the fire and the hiss of the rain. Thorn, his face a mask of hate, raised his pistol. To hell with you. Alice did not flinch. A shot. But it was not from Thorn. It was from the woods. A rifle crack. Thorn's gun, the pistol in his hand, exploded. It shattered, the metal flying, and he screamed, clutching a hand that was suddenly a ruin of blood and bone. The crowd looked. Elias looked. On the ridge, just at the edge of the trees, was a figure, small, holding a rifle. Thomas. The boy had not gone home. He has help, someone screamed. The boy, he's cursed too. It was all they needed. The lightning, the fire, the exploding gun, the devil in the wagon. The mob broke. It was not a retreat. It was a rout. They ran. They scrambled. They fell over each other. They fought to get away, to get back to their homes, to hide from the wrath they had called down. In 10 seconds, the clearing was empty. Empty. Save for the burning tree, the smoldering cross, the screaming, wounded Thorn, and the preacher, who was on his knees, weeping. Rain poured. It came down in solid, cold sheets, hissing on the hot embers, turning the clearing into a sea of mud. Elias turned. He dropped the axe. He climbed into the wagon bed. Marielle was curled in a ball, shaking, her eyes squeezed shut. Marielle, he said, his voice raw. She uncurled. She looked at him. She looked at his arm, which was now soaked in blood. He reached for her. He pulled her up. He used his knife and cut the last of the ropes from her wrists. She collapsed against him, her small, soaked, shaking body pressed against his. He could feel the desperate, frantic pounding of her heart. I thought I'd die alone, she whispered, her voice a broken thing, her lips against his wet shirt. He put his good arm around her, his hand in her wet hair, and held her. You're not alone anymore, he said. He helped her to the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her, his body screaming in protest. He grabbed the reins. The mules were terrified, but they were still hitched. He cracked the reins. Get up! The wagon lurched, the wheels sucking at the mud, and then they were moving. They careened out of the clearing, onto the path, and into the storm. They were not followed. Not immediately. But Elias heard a shout, the sound of a horse. A few, the brave or the truly hateful, were coming. But the storm was their shield. The rain was so heavy he could barely see the mules' heads. The world was a roar of water and wind. The tracks were gone the second they were made. The wagon slid and bucked, Elias fighting the reins, his wounded arm a dull, agonizing fire. He did not know how long they rode. An hour, 2. Marielle had not moved. She was rigid, staring into the gray wall of water. Then, slowly, she seemed to come back to herself. She looked at him. She looked at his arm, at the blood that was still flowing. Black in the darkness. You're hurt, she said, her voice flat. It's fine. She ripped a long strip from the hem of her already torn dress. Her hands were raw, her fingers stiff, but she was gentle. While he held the reins, his knuckles white, she began to clean the wound, using the rainwater that was pouring off them. It's just a graze, she said, her voice shaking. It passed through. I'm fine, he said again, gritting his teeth as she tightened the bandage. She finished. She had a piece of the cloth left. She used it to wipe the blood from his hand, from his knuckles. Her own hands were bloody, the rope burns raw and weeping. She held his hand, and in the middle of the chaos, in the dark, with the rain lashing them, she leaned over and pressed her lips to his knuckles. A kiss, a seal, a promise. Elias's throat closed. He said nothing. He just drove on. They drove until the mules were stumbling, until Elias was swaying on the seat, the loss of blood and the cold making the world swim. He pulled them to a stop. We have to, "Stop," he slurred. He half fell from the wagon. Mario was beside him. They were in a thick grove of pines, sheltered, but soaked. "There," she said, pointing. It was a shape, a dark square against the trees, an old hunter's shack, abandoned. They unhitched the mules, leaving them to graze. They stumbled to the door. It opened. Inside, it was dark, but it was dry. It smelled of damp, of old rot, of animals, but it was dry. Elias found a few pieces of dry wood under a collapsed cot. He used his knife, his flint. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely strike a spark. "Let me," Mariel said. Her hands, raw as they were steady. She took the flint and, with a patient, practiced hand, she made a spark. She coaxed a tiny, trembling flame to life. It was not much, a small, smoky fire. But it was warmth. It was light. They collapsed in front of it. They were both shaking, a deep, bone-rattling chill that was not just from the cold. It was reaction. It was the terror, finally allowed to surface. They sat there, not touching, just shaking, watching the small flame. "We're alive," Elias said. It sounded stupid. Mariel looked at him. Her eyes, in the firelight, were huge. They were dark pools of memory, of terror, of a strength he could not comprehend. She was not the woman he had found in the rain. She was not the witch the town had tried to burn. She was something else. She was a survivor. She was still shaking. He was too. He reached out, his hand trembling, and put his good arm around her. "Come here." She moved, not against him, but beside him. They huddled together, sharing the meager warmth of their bodies, wrapped in the canvas tarp from the wagon, which was still damp. They stared at the fire. They were alive. They had escaped, but they were empty. Mariel turned her head. She looked at him, not at his face, but at his chest. He could feel her breath, warm, on his wet shirt. She started. Her voice was a rasp. She moved. It was not a tentative move. It was deliberate. She shifted, turning her body, and climbed into his lap. She straddled him, her legs on either side of his, her hands on his shoulders. Elias's breath caught. He could feel the heat of her, even through the wet clothes. "Mariel," he whispered. She put a finger, raw and bloody, to his lips. "Hush." She looked into his eyes, and what he saw there was not desire, not love, not gratitude. It was a fierce, feral, desperate will. "I want to live," she whispered, her voice raw, her eyes locked on his. She leaned in, her cold, wet lips brushing his. "Inside you." It was not a request. It was a demand. It was a woman who had been tied to a stake, who had faced the fire, who had been marked for death, and who was now, in this dark, cold shack, claiming her life. She was claiming his life. His hands, of their own accord, came up. His good hand went to her back, pulling her close. His wounded one tangled in her wet, matted hair. He kissed her. It was not love. It was not comfort. It was feral. It was desperate. It was two people who had been to the edge of death and clawed their way back. It was the taste of rain and blood and smoke and life. It was a fire, not to burn, but to forge. It was the only thing in the world that was real. The mountains were a purgatory. They fled the hunter's shack at first light, the mules pulling the wagon up trails that were not meant for wheels. The world was a vertical, windswept agony of rock and ice. They did not speak. They just moved, driven by the terror behind them and the vast, cold emptiness ahead. They spent the first winter in an abandoned mine shaft. It was not a life. It was an existence, huddled in the dark. The mules their only, precious lifeline. Their warmth shared in the suffocating blackness. Elias, his arm a throbbing, useless ache, hunted with snares. Mariel, her hands still raw, foraged for roots that were woody and bitter. They survived on grit and the shared, desperate, feral memory of the fire. They were not two people in love. They were two animals, trapped in the same hole, learning to trust the warmth of the other's fur. Spring came. not as a gentle green, but as a violent, muddy thaw. They moved on. Higher, deeper. They followed the path Elias had scouted, the one that led to the snows, and in a high valley, laced with snow-melt streams and hidden by a sheer wall of granite, they found the first one. His name was Caleb. He was a freedman, or so he said, with the brand of a runaway on his cheek and a rifle he knew how to use. He had a cabin, a small, tight box, and he did not want company. He met them with the rifle leveled. "Keep walking," he'd said, his voice a low growl. Elias, gaunt and hard, stepped down from the wagon. His own rifle, Thomas's rifle, he never forgot, in his hand, but Mariel put a hand on his arm. Caleb was sick. His skin was gray, his breath a wet rattle. "You have lung fever," Mariel said, her voice clear in the high, thin air. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "I got a bullet." "You have a bullet," Mariel said, "and you have lung fever, and you will be dead in 3 days." She walked past the rifle. She walked past Elias. She walked to the wagon and came back with a small bag of herbs she had salvaged. The ones she had gathered on the flight, they stayed. Elias sat on a log, his rifle across his knees, and watched Caleb. Mariel boiled water. She made poultices. She sat by the man's cot and forced bitter teas down his throat. For 2 days, they did not speak. On the 3rd day, Caleb's fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear for the first time. He looked at Mariel, then at Elias. "You ain't from here." "No," Elias said. "Running. Same as you," Elias said. Caleb nodded. He looked at the valley. "Plenty of wood, plenty of water. Game's good. If you know where to look. Ground's thin, but it'll take a potato." It was not an invitation. It was a statement of fact. "We'll build," Elias said. And so they did. Elias, his arm finally healing, found a strength he did not know he possessed. He found peace, not in the absence of trouble, but in the presence of purpose. He swung an axe, and the sound of it was a prayer. He cut wood. He cleared land. He, Caleb, and Mariel. They built a cabin, a real one, with a stone hearth and a solid door. And then the others came. They came, not as a flood, but as a trickle. A widow from a failed mining camp, her 2 children pale and starving. 2 orphans, barely teenagers, who had run away from an abusive freight driver. A man with 1 arm and a past he would not speak of. They were the broken, the lost, the hunted. They were the outcasts. Each time, the first instinct was fear. Elias would meet them at the pass, his hand on his gun. But Mariel would see the hunger, the sickness, the terror, and she would say, "There is room." They called the place Snowhide Valley. It was not a town, it was a secret. Elias and Caleb built the cabins. The women, led by a widow named Abigail, started a farm, a hard, desperate patch of earth that grew potatoes and beans and squash. They were more precious than gold. Elias found his rhythm. He rose before the sun, his body hard and scarred. And he worked, he farmed, he hunted, he reinforced the hidden pass. He was not a gunman. He was not a drifter. He was a builder. He was a guardian. He found a quiet, burning peace in the hard labor, in the feel of the axe handle, in the sight of the smoke rising from their 7, then 8, then 10 chimneys. Mariel became their heart. She taught the children. She used her one saved book, and then the Bible the widow Abigail had brought, to teach them their letters. She delivered their babies. The first one, in the dead of winter, was terrifying. The mother, one of the orphans, was 17 and screaming, but Mariel's hands, though trembling, were sure. She remembered her grandmother. She brought a new life into their hidden world. She was not a witch. She was not an angel. She was a healer. She was the one they came to for a broken bone, a broken heart, a cough, a fear. She was respected. She was, for the first time in her life, safe. Years passed. The valley grew. The children she had taught grew tall. The 2 mules that had saved them were long gone, but their descendants pulled the plows. They had a herd of goats. They had a life. And then the outside world found them. It was a man, a prospector, who stumbled into the valley, half mad with fever, having followed the stream. He was dying. The old fear returned. Elias and Caleb held him at gunpoint, but Marielle, her hair now streaked with the first threads of silver, just looked at the man. "Bring him to my cabin," she said. She treated him. She saved his life, and Elias sat on her porch, his rifle across his knees, for the entire 2 weeks. "You'll tell no one," Elias said. When the man was strong enough to leave, the man, his face full of awe, looked at Marielle. I won't, I swear it." He left, and they waited. They waited for the posse. They waited for the miners. They waited for the world to come and burn them down. But no one came. The next time, it was different. It was winter. A man rode into the valley, leading a mule that carried a bundle. He was from Dead Mare Gulch. Elias was on him before he was 10 feet past the pass. He pulled the man from his horse, his arm across his throat, his knife to the man's neck. "Please." The man choked. Elias recognized him. It was Abe, the blacksmith. "Please, Mr. Rourke, it's Sarah, my wife." Elias looked at the mule. The bundle was a woman, wrapped in quilts, near death. She's got the consumption. The doctor in Gulch. He's a drunk. He can't do nothing. I heard the prospector. He said there was a healer in the mountains. An angel, he called her." Elias's knife did not move. He was shaking with a rage so old and cold it burned. "An angel? You're a long way from the town that called her a witch. We was wrong." Abe wept, his face in the snow. We was afraid. God forgive us. We was afraid. Please, don't let her die because of me." Elias looked up. Marielle was there. She had walked from their cabin, her shawl wrapped tight. She looked at Abe. She looked at Sarah. "Bring her inside, Elias," she said, her voice quiet. Elias stood by her, silently, always armed, always watching. Marielle treated Sarah. She could not cure the consumption, but she eased the pain. She gave her herbs to sleep. She gave her broth. She sat with her. And when Sarah died, 3 days later, it was with Marielle's hand in hers, peaceful. Abe did not know what to do. He was broken. "You'll bury her here," Marielle said, "on the hill, facing the sun." Elias stood by, his rifle in his hand, as Abe dug the grave. They were the only two. She was a good woman," Abe whispered, not looking at Elias. She never believed it. About Miss Mariel, she was just scared of me, scared of the preacher." "I know," Elias said. Abe left. He never returned. But others came, over the years. A few, desperate, dying. They came from Dead Mare Gulch, from other, newer towns. They came looking for the angel in the mountains, and Marielle treated them all. And Elias stood by, his face a mask, his hand on his gun, his eyes always watching. They never forgot. The past was not a different country. It was a room in their own house. They lived with it. Elias had nightmares. He would wake in the dark, gasping, his hands clenched, seeing Silas fall, seeing the orange flames lick at Marielle's feet. He would be drenched in a cold sweat, and Marielle would be awake. She would not ask him what he dreamed. She would not tell him it was all right. She would just turn, her body, still warm and familiar after all these years, and press herself against his back. She would take his clenched fist and uncurl it, lacing her fingers with his. She would just hold him until his breathing steadied, until the past loosened its grip. And Marielle, she still looked at the tree line. She would be hanging laundry or weeding her garden, and she would stop. Her head would lift, her eyes would go to the pass, to the thin break in the trees that was the only way in, the only way out. She would just watch. Her stillness was a scar, a reminder that the world was still out there, but they slept in each other's arms, every night, for 30 years. One day, in the late summer, a woman rode in. She was alone. She was not sick, not dying. She was Strong, she was in her late 30s, with a face full of sun and a clear, steady gaze. She stopped at the edge of the valley and waited. Elias, his hair now a thick, steel gray, walked out to meet her, his rifle in his hand, though it was lighter now. "I'm not here for trouble," the woman said. Her voice was steady. I'm looking for Marielle." "Who are you?" "My name is Susanna," she said. I'm from Dead Mare Gulch." Elias's face hardened. Marielle came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. She, too, was gray, but her back was straight, her eyes as clear as the mountain water. Susanna saw her, and her face crumpled. She slid off her horse and just stared. Susanna started, her voice thick with tears. I was a little girl, in Dead Mare Gulch. My brother's name was Amos. He was the one with the red hair. He threw stones." Marielle's hands stilled on her apron. She remembered. "I was there," Susanna said, the tears now flowing freely. "I watched. I was so scared. Of you. Of the preacher. Of my brother. Of everything." She took a step forward, then another. "We left after the fire. After you were gone. The town, it died. The preacher, he went mad. Truly mad. Started seeing devils everywhere. He starved himself to death. Said food was a sin. Thorn. His hand was ruined. He became a beggar. A drunk. He froze to death 2 winters later." "Dead Mare Gulch," she said. "It's gone. The wind just blew it away. There's nothing left but foundations." She was standing in front of Mariel now. I've been looking for you. For 10 years. I heard the stories. The angel in the mountain, I had to see." "Why?" Mariel's voice was soft. Susanna reached into her saddlebag. She pulled out a small, carved wooden bird. "My brother, Amos, he made this before he died. He got the fever, the real one. He told me to find you. He said, 'Tell her I'm sorry.'" She held it out. Marielle looked at the small, crude bird. She did not take it. "But that's not why I came," Susanna said. "I came for me." She looked at Marielle, her eyes desperate, grateful. "You saved me. That day, I was sick, not the fever, but in my heart, I was full of hate and fear. And I saw you. I saw what they did to you. And I saw him." She looked at Elias. "I saw him ride into the thunder. And I knew what was real. You were never a witch." She was sobbing now. "A grown woman. You were an angel." Marielle looked at her. She looked at Elias. She looked at the valley, her home. She took Susanna's hand. "We are none of us angels," Marielle said, her voice gentle. "And none of us devils. We are just people, trying to live." She took the small bird. "Go in peace, Susanna. Your brother is forgiven." That evening, the air was warm, smelling of pine and the coming cold. Elias and Marielle sat on their porch, under the pines, gray at the temples. The valley was quiet. They could hear the sound of their grandchildren, Caleb's grandchildren, Abigail's grandchildren, their grandchildren, playing by the stream. She took his hand. It was an old hand now, scarred and calloused, but it fit hers. She placed it over her heart. "You didn't save me from the fire, Elias," she said, her voice quiet. He looked at her, confused. "You saved me, yes," she said, "but not from that fire. That was their fire, their hate." She pressed his hand harder against her chest. "You lit the fire inside me, the one that was my own, the one that my grandmother, that the world, tried to put out, the one that made me want to live. You didn't save me from death, my love. You saved me for life." He said nothing. He just leaned his head back, his eyes closing, and felt the steady, strong beat of her heart under his palm. In the far distance, over the high peaks, A low rumble began. Thunder. Elias Rourke did not flinch. He did not look for the storm. He sat up, his back straight, and Marielle rested her head on his shoulder. He smiled. A slow, quiet smile. Lines crinkling around his eyes. He looked at the vast, darkening sky, and at the woman who was his world. "Let it come," he said, his voice a low, peaceful rumble of its own. "I've already got the only miracle I'll ever need. Thank you for listening to our story. We would be honored if you would comment and let us know where you are listening from. Please consider subscribing to From Wild West, and we invite you to share your thoughts with us in English.